I literally, in my notes, put, it's my front runner for favorite movie of the year, might even crack my top 10 of all time. And then I was like, no, the top 10 thing will give it away. Welcome, nerds, to another episode of the Nerds You're Looking For podcast, a weekly nerd culture podcast that discusses the culture through various segments. You can check out all of our content on our website, thenerdspodcast.com, including our YouTube channel. We have a companion kind of slash gaming YouTube channel that I post, I stream, and I post gaming content on as well. We also have Letterboxd. My co-hosts and I have separate Letterboxd accounts, which, if you're not familiar, is basically just social media for watching movies. My account is at the Nerds Podcast, and my co-host account is at that Tyler Hunt. You can also find our star ratings for every movie that we've formally reviewed on this podcast on our website as well by clicking the Nerd Reviews tab on the website, thenerdspodcast.com. I am joined by my aforementioned co-host, that Tyler Hunt. How's it going, man?
I am doing pretty good, dude. How are you?
I'm good. I've been playing a lot of Red Dead Redemption 2. I hope it's not what you're into. We didn't talk about what you're into, so I hope I'm not stepping on that. But I've been playing that a lot in the last couple of days. When it first came out, I had streamed it a couple of times, but then I got busy with other stuff, and I think I'm actually, for those that subscribe to our YouTube channel, I think I'm just going to kind of hit the reset button after New Year's because it's going to be really busy for me. I'm going to Vegas for Christmas in about a week or so. It's like, I guess it's a little over 2 weeks now I'll be in Vegas, so I'm just going to kind of hit the reset button for the YouTube channel with streaming and posting content after the new year. So if you've been wondering why I haven't been posting that much content, that's why. But yeah, I streamed it for a couple of days, and then I kind of fell away from it with Pokemon coming out and a few other things. And so I've been playing it a lot recently, and as I do with a lot of RPGs, I kind of get lost in just like the atmosphere and like the environment and just riding my horse around and like hunting animals and stuff. It's really, really fun.
Yeah, I haven't played it since I first got it, unfortunately. Obviously, we've talked in past episodes that this is a busy time of year for me at work, but I did make a big purchase last week, which was I finally got a 4K TV.
Oh, yeah?
So I mean, I have an OG Xbox One, so it's not 4K compatible, but obviously I have the PlayStation Pro that I got whenever Spider-Man came out in September, so I'm probably going to take that from my office and hook it up to the 4K TV that I bought so that I can actually enjoy playing games in 4K, and I'll probably move my Xbox One up to my office and play games like Red Dead Redemption 2 up here since I have just a normal HD TV up here. But I finally took the leap, and I love it. It's great.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. So are you going to start, I'm assuming you're going to start not necessarily converting because you have a huge Blu-ray collection. I doubt you're going to go back and spend the money and upgrade a lot of those to 4K, but I'm assuming that you're going to start from now on buying the 4K stuff.
It probably depends on the movie.
Sure.
If I'm being honest, I think, I do have a lot of Blu-rays that I bought over the years, but I don't buy nearly as many anymore, obviously, given all of the things that you can stream and do from that standpoint. So I think Marvel movies will probably be films that I buy on 4K. If they ever restore the Star Wars films to 4K, I think that would be a cool purchase. But yeah, I mean, I think I'll definitely be selective, but there will be movies that I buy on 4K, and then there will be movies that I just continue to buy on regular Blu-ray.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm kind of that way, and I'm actually recently decided that, so it's funny because I have like tiers of stuff that I buy. So there's stuff that I really like that I want on 4K that are like really action heavy and I think are beneficial to have that 4K, the extra price point that is 4K. And then I have stuff that I want to get on 4K Steelbook as well, but then there's also stuff that I want to have on just Blu-rays, fine for me. And then there's other stuff that I want to have, but I don't care so much about having the physical copy, and so I just buy it on Amazon Video. So there's a lot of tiers that I have recently. Like, I've been kind of not wanting to go more digital. Like, I like having that physical media in my hand, but recently I'm just like, well, there's movies that I want to have, but I don't necessarily feel like I need to have a physical copy of it. So I just recently started doing that as well.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I'm the same way. Obviously, I love physical media, and I think that that's just part of the culture that we grew up in, but it also becomes very space constraining if you continue to buy Blu-ray after Blu-ray after Blu-ray. I mean, this will go on till the end of time because they will consistently release new movies that I'll want to buy. So I've had to purge my collection a few times and, get some stuff out of there.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And it's funny because my wife and I just had this conversation, but what was the last time you bought a physical CD?
Oh, man. Well, you're going to give me shit because you already gave me shit about liking this band. But the last Avenged Sevenfold CD, like 2 or 3 years ago, just because I own all of their CDs physically. So, I mean, it's been years since I bought a physical copy.
Yeah, I almost bought, there was like $100 collector's edition of the new Coheed album that had just come out, and I almost got that, but I just couldn't do it. As much as I love them, I just couldn't do it. So I got the iTunes version. So, like, I don't even buy their albums anymore, physical copies. Like, I don't want to do that. Like, I just have like this CD case in this other room that's just filled with my old CD cases. Like, it's such a waste of space.
Yeah, I have them in a box in my basement. That's where all my physical CDs are. So remind me, I know you have a 4K TV in your living room. What do you have hooked up to it to stream and watch stuff via 4K? Is it an Xbox?
Yeah, so I own 2 Xboxes, which, depending on who I'm talking to, I say with pride, or I say kind of embarrassed.
So, do you play any games on that Xbox?
Yeah, I'm actually playing Red Dead on that TV right now, because, like I said, I haven't had really time to stream, so I just moved my Red Dead save game onto that Xbox, so I've just been playing it in the living room.
How do you do that?
How do I play the game?
No, so I'm just not as familiar with like the Xbox hard drive because all I've had to do is buy like an external hard drive. So I guess if I had 2 Xboxes, I could just use the external and move it from Xbox to Xbox. But I mean, how did you transfer it from one Xbox to another?
I have an external hard drive.
Okay. So exactly what I just said. I was just curious.
You answered your own question, for sure.
I was just curious because that thought had crossed my mind to do what you did and get an Xbox One X for the 4K TV and then have my other Xbox just up in my office.
Yeah, that's exactly what I did.
I don't blame you. That's cool.
All right, so before we get started, I did want to make a note that this will actually be our last episode before Christmas. So next week next week will be our last episode, excuse me. So I got a little ahead of myself. So next week we are going to be reviewing Aquaman, and then that following week, like I said, I will be in Vegas. I'll be leaving for Vegas that Friday or Saturday, I can't remember. And then Tyler's actually coming to Evansville for that same week, so we're going to kind of miss each other there. But yeah, we're not going to do an episode that week, but we'll be back for, what is it, in a couple of weeks? What are we going to be reviewing? I don't remember.
I'm sure the week after Christmas would probably be our top 10.
Oh, no, it's Nerd of Year's Resolutions. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, we're doing that episode that following week, the week after Christmas. So, yeah, we will be doing one more episode, and then we'll be taking a week hiatus for Christmas. So I just wanted to point that out real quick before we got started. So if this is your first episode, we kind of like to check in with each other the first bit of it, and we just call it what we're into. So it's basically whatever we're watching, playing, whatever. So what are you into this week?
Over the last few weeks, I've been slowly watching a new 6-part docu-series on Netflix called Dogs. So I watched
the first episode.
Did you? So it's been kind of a slow burn for me. I think I started it the week it came out, and I've watched 4 of the 6 episodes. It's an anthology type series, so each episode follows a different story about a person and their dog. Like I said, I've watched 4 of the 6, so I'm still finishing up, but I definitely wanted to mention it on the podcast since you and I are both huge dog lovers. I think that the way that this series is framed is pretty great. It uses the connection we have with our pups to talk about social issues. So of the first 4 episodes I watched, each is completely different from one another and explores the human-dog relationship in different cultures. So I'm going to run down the 4 episodes briefly. So the first episode takes place in America, and it follows a family that's adopting a service dog for their daughter that suffers from extreme seizures. That episode definitely pulls on your heartstrings, and for me, it was just amazing to see how much this family loved the dog before they even got it, which I thought was pretty cool and shows how much we love our pups. And the second episode then moves on and follows a man that was separated from his dog when he flees Syria. And then it shows the extreme lengths that he's going through and his friends and family back in Syria are going through to reunite him with his Siberian Husky, whose name is Zeus. And this episode does a really good job of exploring the horrors of the Syrian refugee crisis through the lens of a man and his pup. So just another example of, kind of tackling some cultural issues through the story of a guy and his dog. The third episode follows an Italian fisherman and his Labrador retriever named Ice and explores their connection. Ice is the fisherman's best friend and fishes with him every day. And the episode explores the fisherman's emotions as he navigates a declining fish population and the drama that surrounds his children potentially not taking over his family business. Ice, the dog, ends up being like the one constant in the fisherman's life, and that they are truly best friends. And I realize as I talk about this show that I did a really good job of remembering all of the names of the dogs, but I could not tell you any of the humans' names. So, that kind of shows you where my focus was. But the fourth and final episode that I've watched out of the 6 probably carries the least weight of any of the episodes I watched. It follows a Japanese grooming couple that are competing in a groom expo in Pasadena. And, this may not be the most emotional episode, and it may be silly to have people who don't get, or it's silly to those of us, at least I'm assuming you're like me and you don't really get the whole dog grooming competition thing, but it's still about cute doggos, so it kind of gets a pass. But again, probably my least favorite of the 4. So I think that realistically, if you're a human with basic emotions, then you're going to love this series. It's incredibly pure, and it explores one of the best and most basic relationships on the planet, in my opinion. A quote from the show, actually from episode 4, which was my least favorite, but there's this quote that one of the people say that I really liked it, which that human relationships are so complex, but dogs make life simpler. And that really resonated with me. I consistently think about how much better my life is because of Ivy, my dog, and it's not lost on me how astounding that is. I'm definitely not a religious person at all by any means, but if there are such things as guardian angels, that little dog is mine. And somehow that Netflix was able to capture those types of feelings and emotions into this wonderfully put together series. So I'm definitely looking forward to finishing up all 6 episodes. Each episode is like 50 to 55 minutes, so it's a bit of a chore in some cases to devote that much time to an episode about dogs, but it's, like I said, pretty pure. It's a good watch. It definitely pulls on your heartstrings, and I'd recommend it.
Yeah, so I mentioned that I watched the first episode, and honestly, you give me shit a lot, especially last week when we reviewed the Christmas Chronicles, that I don't really have a soul, and I really couldn't get into it. Mostly, I think it's because I didn't really care that much about the family. I really just wanted more about the dogs. And you kind of talked about Ivy a little bit, and I've posted this on my own Facebook before, like Ram, like me coming home and Ram being so excited to see me, like it's the best part of his day every single day, and just the pure joy that he has when I get home. It doesn't matter how shitty of a day that I've had, just like him being so happy to see me. And Caesar, my other dog, is he's okay. we're kind of content with each other, but it's me and Ram for sure. Like my wife and I always joke around that Rambo's my dog and Caesar's her dog for sure. But yeah, it's just, I mean, you talked about Ivy, like Rambo, like him just being so happy to see me no matter what happened just makes my day so much better. So I really wanted to like this show, but like I said, I really just couldn't get into that first episode, mostly because I didn't really care that much about the family.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point. There were a couple points in these episodes where they really start to dig into the humans, because obviously humans can talk and tell stories. And sure. I'm like, I just want more of the dogs, but realistically, there's not much more you can do with the dogs because they can't talk, they can't tell stories. They're just kind of the piece that this series is about. So I definitely think that that's an interesting point and one that I don't necessarily disagree with.
All right, so what I am into is my wife and I saw this little movie that they call A Star is Born, which I'm pretty sure we're like the only ones. Like there was like 20 other people in the theater with us when we watched this movie, and I'm pretty sure it's the 20 people that haven't seen this movie because it was a huge hit when it first came out, and it's been out for a couple of months. Like we went to the 7:15 last night, and that was the only showing of this movie. Like it's not going to make it through Christmas, I wouldn't imagine. But it's Bradley Cooper's directorial debut, which is kind of weird. Like I thought this when they first announced that he was directing this movie, because it's a remake of a remake, and it just seems like such a strange movie to make your directorial debut on. But he is obviously pretty passionate about the project because he's directing it, but he also kind of helped write it. It's always kind of weird when there's I think there's 3 writers on this movie, and so it's always kind of weird, like how much did he actually write? And he also starred in it as well. He also stars in it with Lady Gaga as well, and I'll get into her here in a little bit, but Cooper plays a guy named Jackson Maine, who is an alcoholic rock star who stumbles into a drag bar looking for a drink and sees wannabe songwriter and performer Abby, not in drag, perform and instantly falls in love with her. She starts performing with Maine, and while his star fades, she becomes the next pop star. So I kind of think of this movie every movie has a first, second, and third act, but this movie, those acts seem to be very disjointed for me. Like there's very clear lines between the first and second and third act. And I really loved the first act of this movie because it reminded me of a movie that came out a couple of years ago called Crazy Heart, which has Jeff Bridges and Maggie Gyllenhaal in it. It actually came out in I think, 2009, so it's been quite a few years. And it was actually directed by Scott Cooper, who I'm assuming is no relation to Bradley Cooper. And the first part of this film really reminded me a lot of that film. Basically, Bradley Cooper's character, Jackson Maine, reminded me of a younger version of Jeff Bridges' character. Like if there was like an alternate universe where Bradley Cooper doesn't meet Abby, he just becomes Jeff Bridges. Like that's kind of how I felt like. I think Bradley Cooper plays that functioning alcoholic really well, and it doesn't hurt that I really liked that rock / country with a little bit of blues. Like the music in this movie was really, really good. Like I really enjoyed it. And a lot of times when you watch movies like this, the music isn't that great and you're supposed to pretend like it's really good. Like in the movie, everybody's like blown away by their performances or whatever. And I'm just like, that song wasn't that good. But I felt like every time in this movie that they had to perform this song that was really supposed to hit hard, it actually did. And so I was really impressed with that. And I think obviously that has a lot to do with the fact that they cast an actual musician in Lady Gaga. I loved her being in this film because music was such an important part of this film, and it makes me think that she at least had some input into it, which obviously I'm just speculating, but I would imagine that she would have a big part in this movie, like just the input of certain things. Especially there was there's a part, and it's really kind of the second act when she becomes this pop star, and it's kind of that's definitely my least favorite part of the movie, but I definitely appreciated it because she performed at Super Bowl a couple of years ago, and they kind of made this documentary about it on Netflix, and it reminded me, well, the second act of this movie really reminded me a lot of watching that documentary with my wife, just some of the stuff that she has to go through in that documentary to actually get the Super Bowl halftime show ready kind of remind me a lot of some of the parts in this movie. So again, I think she definitely had some input into it. Unfortunately, the second act is definitely where this film lost me. It is 2.5, well, it's not quite 2.5 hours long. It's 2 hours and 16 minutes long. And the second act is when you really feel it. Like, I really loved the Crazy Heart-esque stuff in the first act, but the second act really started to lose me, and I started to definitely check out at times during this movie. I've never seen any of the other movies, but I knew that there was something bad that was going to happen, and even though they planted it really hard, like, just knowing that going in really kind of bothered me, and I don't know if there's any way that you can get around it, just because, again, this is based on a movie that was a remake of another movie. So it's actually kind of interesting because my wife, her friend went and saw this movie when it first came out, and she was like, well, I don't want to spoil it for you, but something really sad happens at the end. And my wife doesn't really particularly care about spoilers, so she just looked it up. And so we were talking about it on the car ride home. Obviously, I'm not going to spoil it on this episode, but we were talking about it. And so she knew exactly what happened going into it. And she's like, they planted it even harder than I thought they did, because she was able to pick up on things here and there that I wasn't able to, because I wasn't sure exactly what was going to happen. I just knew something bad was going to happen. So I thought that was kind of interesting. All in all, I did like this movie, but I think that a lot of my expectations going in was like, this is the best movie this year, and I heard such great things about it, and it didn't quite live up to those expectations. But all in all, I think I would give it probably like 3.5 stars.
Yeah, so I think I briefly brought it up on the podcast after I had seen it, because I thought this movie looked like garbage. And you can go back and listen to my thoughts from that standpoint. And I was dragged to it by my wife, and had no expectations for it, knew nothing about it, and then I don't want to say it blew me away, because it didn't blow me away, but it might creep into my top 10. I don't know, I'd probably give it a 4 out of 10, or I'm sorry, 4 out of 5. So, I mean, obviously I liked it more than you did, but I think part of that might have been that I had zero expectations, because, award season hadn't started to come around, and I again didn't know about the plot twists and turns and how things were going to take a dramatic turn towards the end. So for me, it was all surprising, which I think definitely lends itself to why I liked it more than you do.
For sure. And even before the big twist at the end, which I don't know if it can even be called a twist, because they do, again, plant it pretty hard, and you just know something's happening, like going to happen when he starts kind of getting ready and stuff like that. So I don't know, it just kind of lost me. Like I think her becoming a pop star just wasn't that interesting to me.
Yeah, I mean, that was my whole point of like just not liking the movie before I even saw it, was you're going to tell me that Lady Gaga, some ugly troll that could never be a pop star, when in real life she is one of the most successful pop stars of all time. Like, that just didn't make sense to me.
Oh yeah, for sure. And we definitely bashed this trailer when it first came out. I mean, off recording, we had several conversations where we're just like, it's so unbelievable that they would pick somebody like this. Again, I think it helped the movie ultimately, because again, music plays such a key role in this movie that you have to have somebody that can perform it like it needs to be performed. But at the same time, it's hard for me to believe that this super successful pop star in real life is supposed to be like this ugly, hideous person that could never make it unless he basically picks her up and basically she rides his coattails until she becomes a pop star, which is somewhat insulting, I guess, when you think about it, that the only way that she could have made it is through him. But yeah, I mean, she's such a successful pop star that it was kind of hard for me to wrap my head around that.
This is completely unrelated to that point, but did you realize when watching the movie that her dad is played by Andrew Dice Clay?
Yeah, as soon as I saw him, I was like, because you kind of see him like a side view, like you don't see him up close right away. And I was like, that kind of looks like Andrew Dice Clay. And then eventually you see him more and more throughout the movie. And I was like, yep, that's him.
I didn't put that together. I've never seen him without those huge sunglasses. So not until I was like on IMDb after seeing the movie that I realized that. And then it makes sense, and it definitely sounds like him, but I didn't put it together when watching the movie.
Yeah, it was definitely a weird pull because I haven't seen him in a lot. Like, he doesn't really do stand-up as far as I know. I never really was a fan of him. I get why people liked him when he first came out because he was just so different, but he definitely faded away pretty quickly.
Yeah, I've never watched any of his stand-up, but obviously I'm familiar with him as like a pop culture, I don't want to say icon because he's not an icon, pop culture person, I guess.
Yeah, I was a little bit disappointed with The Star is Born. My wife really liked it, but I think she also kind of felt the runtime a little bit as well. So, I mean, if you haven't seen it, if you're one of the few people that haven't seen it, I definitely suggest checking it out. But yeah, I would just damper your expectations a little bit.
Perfect.
All right, so our next segment is just plainly called Comics. Tyler and I read a ton of comics each week, and we like to spotlight one or two an episode. So what'd you read this week?
So I read Shazaam #1, which came out this week, written by Jeff Johns, and then has two different artists. So Dale Eaglesham did the main art for the main book, and then an artist named Mayo Nato did the art for like a short story that comes at the back end of the comic. So we talk a lot on this podcast about cash grab comics and how Marvel and DC especially tend to put out comics around a film release to capitalize on the momentum of the movie. And I'm doubting that this comic is any exception. And that's exactly why it's coming out a few months before the Shazam movie. But it turns out Jeff Johns' Shazam story goes a little deeper than that as I was kind of researching it. Apparently, he wrote some Shazam shorts that were part of the New 52 continuity that were leading to an ongoing series that fell through. And what's interesting is that this comic picks up after those short stories. And while I don't necessarily think you need to read them to appreciate the comic, I thought that was interesting. So sure, it's a cash grab, absolutely, but it's also one of the best comic writers working behind it and contributing to it. So to me, it's a little forgivable. As far as the issue itself goes, the story is pretty straightforward. It reintroduces the characters of this universe extremely well, and it doesn't use a lot of disposition to do so. There's a 2-page reminder of how Billy Batson gets his powers, then it's kind of off to the races from there. And while I definitely appreciate that this comic moves quick, there is one plot point that I wish they had used a little bit more exposition to explain, and that's the fact that Billy's foster brothers and sisters also have powers and are able to transform into heroes. So this is transparently the first Shazam comic I've ever read, and I'm sure it's the first for a lot of other people too that picked this book up because of the movie. And I think that all of these kids having powers is a pretty big plot point that should have been explained a little bit more, because I didn't realize that going into it. With that being said, it definitely doesn't ruin the book by any means, and the comic does a fantastic job of focusing on these characters as opposed to immediately introducing the threat that they're going to be going up against in this series. There's obviously a huge emotional dynamic to 6 orphans trying to find out what family means while also having superpowers, and I think that Jeff Johns writes that really well. They're all looking to get attention, and the way that he writes it is really charming and lighthearted. The second half of the book, so I mentioned that there was an artist for the second half. So the second half is a story that's drawn by, like I said, I think his or her name is Maya Nato, and it has like a manga style to the art, and that definitely is not the style of art that I typically like to look at and read, but it definitely fits the story because it follows Mary, who's one of the orphans, and how she gets to foster care. It's a much more emotional story than the main plot, and shows some of the abuse that she went through before finding the happy family that she's a part of now. Like I said, the art really is fitting for that, and then in the main story, the art for that is also great and does a great job of illustrating Jeff Johns' work. So overall, I definitely suggest this book, and I'm pretty eager to see the direction it heads over the course of its initial run.
So kind of behind the scenes, a little inside baseball, you had called dibs on this book, and it was funny because you literally said in the text message, I don't know if it's even on your radar, but I want to call dibs on Shazaam #1. And as soon as I read that, I was like, you're exactly right. It was not even on my radar because, honestly, as much as I really liked the trailer and all the promo material we've seen so far for the movie, I'm not really interested that much in the character. I never really liked it in Injustice. Those games, like, just never really fit the way that I like to play those games, so I was never really that excited for the character at all. And of course, I'm not a big DC fan as well, so I think I'm just going to try to go into the movie as fresh as I possibly can with the cleanest slate that I could, so I'm definitely not going to read this book. But I'm glad that you liked it.
Cool. What did you read?
So I read another book that seems like a bit of a cash grab as well. It sounds like you like Shazaam more than I liked this book, though. I read Killmonger #1, which was written by Brian Hill, and the art was done by Juan Ferreira. Of course, everybody knows who Killmonger is now because of Black Panther. Like, if you're listening to this episode, which obviously you are, I don't know why I said that, but you know who Killmonger is. He's basically just the arch villain of Black Panther. He was played by Michael B. Jordan in the Black Panther movie. And in that movie, they tease this really interesting backstory that he gets those little bumps for every kill that he's ever had. And of course, he has all these different bumps. And so you know that he's killed a lot of people. And as comics tend to do when they have these little miniseries focusing on a particular character that has this interesting backstory that hasn't really been dived into. Well, technically he's a character since the 70s in the Marvel Comics, so he does have a backstory that we're familiar with, but this is meant to be more of a backstory for, at least my interpretation of this book was that it was more of a backstory for the Killmonger that we see in Black Panther. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I do like how, before I shit on this book, I will mention that I did like how not all #1s do this, but this #1 definitely was like, hey, you already know who this character is. They gave him, similar to kind of, I think, what you said with Shazaam #1, they did kind of give it like a little paragraph, like, hey, this is what this book is about, kind of introducing him a little bit, but for the most part, they just assumed that you knew who he was, and it kind of just picks up and just kind of just goes from there. There's not a ton of exposition at the very beginning, which is nice because, like I said, I knew who this character was, and I think most people reading this book know who this character is. And I don't want to say that this book is necessarily bad because, as we mentioned before, and as the late great Stan Lee always says, like, the first, or every comic book is somebody's first comic book. So I don't want to shit on it too hard because they really are trying to introduce this character and give a little bit more backstory to this character. It felt like this book was made more for people that don't really know comics that well. And I know I sound pretentious when I say that, and I apologize for that, but that's just how I interpreted this book. It was, hey, this might be somebody's introduction to comic books because they love Black Panther so much. So let's give them backstory to this character that was really popular in this movie. It just never felt like it really wanted to do anything interesting. It just really wanted to give you kind of a bland backstory to it. And the dialogue in this comic was really bad. Like this one part at the very beginning where Killmonger basically just like hits on this woman. It's really stupid and really cheesy, and I rolled my eyes pretty hard. And it's pretty much at the very beginning of the book. So I already had that sour taste in my mouth from the get-go, and it really doesn't get much better. I feel like it just constantly reminds you that it takes place in the Marvel universe. Like, they make like this really cheesy Spider-Man reference at one point, and they just have like these D-list villains in it, and it didn't really work for me at all. And like I said, if this is your first comic book ever, maybe it works for you. Not to say that that's necessarily a bad thing, but it really just didn't do anything for me, and I'm not going to be reading this.
Yeah, so whenever I was going through the new releases of this week and I got to Killmonger #1, my reaction was pretty much yeesh, and I moved on because it's pretty obvious why it's a comic, and it's kind of similar to the Shazam, what I said about Shazam, but this one feels like if it was done so poorly creatively that it means that it was a cash grab even more. So
for sure,
definitely skipping that one.
Yeah.
Cool. So you ready for nerd news?
Yeah. What do you got this week?
I got a lot of shit. It was a big week for nerd news. I think you actually even texted me at one point that there was going to be a lot in nerd news. So I tried to narrow it down to the big stuff, and there was a lot of big stuff. So we got 2 new Marvel Cinematic Universe trailers this week. The first one was Captain Marvel. So the second trailer for that movie. For me, I mean, it shows a little bit more than that first trailer, but I mean, it doesn't make me more or less excited for the movie just because I'm already excited to see that film. So I'm glad that it doesn't give away a ton of the plot. So that's a plus, but at the end of the day, it didn't do a lot for me either.
Yeah, it didn't move the needle for me at all. I mean, I was already really excited for this movie. I will say that when the teaser trailer was announced, like, everybody was freaking out about her punching that old lady. And I felt like this trailer really tried to explain why. And we talked about it when we talked about that first teaser, like, anybody that knows the comic book, and I'm going to sound like a comic book elitist a lot in this episode, and I apologize for that. But like we talked about it, anybody that knows the Marvel comics knows why she punched that lady. And I felt like it was explaining to everybody else why she punched that lady.
Yeah, which was unnecessary.
For sure.
So the other trailer that came out was the bigger of the two, and that is we finally got a trailer for Avengers Endgame. So, I mean, the trailer itself is fine. I kind of hated the hype for it, though. I don't know how closely you followed along, but Marvel fans almost felt like the way that people talked about this trailer, it made it seem like they felt like they deserved it, which is so shitty, like such a shitty way to see and do things. So, I mean, the trailer itself is fine. It's kind of similar to that Captain Marvel trailer. It didn't really move the needle for me. I mean, it was cool to see those characters and see a little bit of the aftermath of what happens at the end of Infinity War, but they don't show a whole lot, which to me is a good thing. I'm obviously super excited for April to get here and to see this movie, but I mean, it's going to be amazing either way. Like, I don't need a trailer to show me that. The other big piece of the trailer being released was that the title of the movie was also released in the process, which is, of course, Endgame, which, whatever, fine. I mean, they could have called it Avengers Dog Shit, and I'd still go see it. So
yeah, I thought it was weird that they teased the title so much, and then that ended up being the title, and it just Doctor Strange says it in Infinity War, and it's just so obvious that why even tease it for this long? Like, why call this movie Avengers 4 for so long if you were just going to call it such a I don't want to say generic. It's not a bad title by any means. It's just kind of blah for me.
For sure. It's fine. I mean, that movie's going to be amazing, so I don't need a trailer to show me that.
Was it already announced and I just missed it? But didn't this trailer kind of announce that it was being pushed up to April, or was that something that I missed? Because wasn't it originally going to come out May, and they pushed it up to April?
I think it got pushed up like a week, right? I don't think it was anything crazy.
Okay, yeah, you're right. We had already talked about that. That shows how much I remember and pay attention to the stuff that you talk about.
I mean, it's coming out April 26th, 2019, and I think the original release date for it was the week after that, so early May, which would have been like May 3rd or May 4th.
Yeah, I do remember now that I said that we had already talked about that before.
Cool. So I'm going to cut... well, fuck it. There was another trailer that was released, and I doubt you watched it, but I'll throw it out there just in case. And there was a trailer for a movie called Brightburn released last night. Did you watch this?
I have no idea what that is.
So this is the big James Gunn movie, I think, that was hinted... Like, they were going to release...
Oh, the Sony one?
Yeah, they were going to announce it at Comic-Con, and they ended up not announcing it because of all of the controversy surrounding him, and it's coming out early next year. It turns out, like, it made it sound like he was the director of this movie. He is just a producer. He didn't even write it. And I looked, and the two writers of this film have the last name Gunn, so I'm assuming it's like his brothers or cousins or something, but he's just a producer on it. He didn't direct it, but essentially this movie is basically, what if Superman was bad instead of good? So, like, I mean, that's literally what it is. Elizabeth Banks plays the mom. Her and her husband want a kid. There's an alien spaceship that crash lands. They adopt the kid that was in the alien spaceship, but as he starts to get his powers, as he grows up, he becomes like a villain or like a Michael Myers type slasher instead of a superhero. So I think that it might be a little interesting, but I think that was also a lot of buildup for something that doesn't really look that great, to be honest. So, and I would also be pissed off if I was one of the writers or the actual director of this movie, because the trailer plays it off like this was James Gunn's baby and all he did was produce it. So, insignificant.
Yeah, it sounds pretty stupid.
Speaking of things that are pretty stupid, Kevin Hart was announced and then resigned from hosting the Oscars all in the same week. So since we last spoke, because of some homosexual tweets that he made in 2009 and 2010 that he pretty much refused to apologize for. So I've always kind of not liked Kevin Hart that much, and he was such a douche about this whole thing that it's pretty much solidified for me at this point.
Yeah, I didn't really follow this that much because I'm kind of not necessarily over the Oscars. I definitely will watch them, but like the fact that there doesn't even need to be a host, really. I mean, just have somebody do the opening monologue, and that's pretty much it, because there's not really a ton of hosting after that. So I didn't really care that Kevin Hart was announced the host, and then, I mean, I have my problems with the whole bringing up people's tweets from years ago, but he was, like you said, such a douche about it that he kind of deserved the backlash. But like with James Gunn, it was like he had already apologized several times about this, and yeah, it's just that whole thing was a little bit different. But like when it was brought to Kevin Hart's attention, he just like you said, just refused to apologize for it, and he never. I mean, he basically just stepped aside just because he didn't want to apologize for these tweets, and it was very silly.
Very much so. So, speaking of award shows, we did get the nominees for the Golden Globes this week, and I am not going to go through all of the nominees, but I did want to point out one nomination that is significant for nerds like us, and that's the fact that Black Panther was nominated for Best Motion Picture Drama, which is pretty cool. Hopefully that carries over to an Oscar nomination as well. But I think that that's pretty deserved, especially when you look at some of the movies that it's up against, like Bohemian Rhapsody for some fucking reason.
I think after, what was it? Was it Wolf of Wall Street and The Martian? Was that the same year that they were both nominated for a comedy or something like that? I feel like since then, the Golden Globes have just been trolling us with the musical and comedy category, because Bohemian Rhapsody, which again, I can't say those words for some reason. I didn't practice because I didn't know I was going to have to say it today. But, and then what was the other one? Oh, A Star is Born. We're both nominated in a drama category, and I just feel like, yeah, Star is Born is a drama, but music plays such a huge role. Like, why wouldn't you put that under musical category? Like, I don't understand. It's like the two movies that were not necessarily musicals per se, but they definitely both had music that played a huge role in the movie, were in the category. I feel like the Golden Globes are just trolling us at this point.
Yeah, I don't think they know what they're doing, man.
For sure.
So that's all I had for like the Golden Globes, unless there were any other nominations you wanted to point out. But I mean,
the fact that Toni Collette isn't nominated for Hereditary is pretty ridiculous.
Yeah, that is shitty.
But that was pretty much my only big takeaway, was the fact that the musical and comedy category is a little weird this year, and then that she wasn't nominated.
Yeah. So, I mean, the link to the nominations will be in the show notes if you want to see the full list, and then I'm sure we'll talk about the winners once the show happens. So I have one more story, and then I'm going to throw it over to you, Pat, for the Video Game Awards. And I didn't know if you wanted to talk about this in your spiel, but it's kind of a news story as well, because it's the announcement of a new game, which you posted on our Facebook, which is Mortal Kombat 11 was announced during the Video Game Awards.
So, yeah, this was actually going to be something that I talked about, but that's cool. We can use it, kind of transition into the Game Awards. So they dropped a new trailer. This was kind of a game that they had been teasing a little bit, but they hadn't really officially announced it. And I think it's coming out in April. So it's going to be a pretty quick turnaround from when it was announced to when we're actually going to get the game. For video games, like, you normally know about a game years ahead of time because it takes so long. They did drop a trailer. The trailer was pretty cool if you can ignore the terrible rap music that they put on top of it. It was so stupid. I don't understand the creative choice to put that stupid fucking song in there. But other than that, it was still pretty cool, and I'm really excited for the game. I love Mortal Kombat. I grew up on those games. I'm a huge Mortal Kombat fan. I love the Injustice games as well, which is made by the same studio. So I'm super psyched for this game. I really hope that it's good.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say I could care less, because I've played Mortal Kombat games before, and there's a chance that I could play this, but the trailer just shows the characters fighting, right? I mean, it's nothing that really shows where this game is headed, and then you put the shitty music over it whenever you have one of the best video games of songs of all time at your disposal. It just doesn't make any sense to me. So I'm curious to see gameplay and what the story is going to look like for this game. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's just an announced trailer, so it is what it is.
For sure. And then just kind of transitioning into the stuff that I want to talk about with the Game Awards, and like we just talked about with the Golden Globes, I'm not going to go through every single category. I'm just going to kind of pick out a couple that I thought were interesting. But before I do that, there was another trailer for a game that I was pretty excited for, and that is Far Cry: A New Dawn, which is a follow-up to a game that I really liked this past year, Far Cry 5. I played Far Cry Primal, but I never played any of the like real Far Cry games, because Far Cry Primal is just like a prehistoric Far Cry game. So I never really knew too much about Far Cry, and I really wanted to get into Far Cry, so I decided to play Far Cry 5, which I didn't know that I was going to say Far Cry like 10 times in the last 30 seconds. But Far Cry: A New Dawn is basically a follow-up. If you didn't play Far Cry 5, then I won't spoil the ending, but basically something happens, and it really changes the world, so to speak, and A New Dawn is kind of a follow-up to that, and I'm really excited to see where the environment, that RPG open world environment, will be affected by what happens at the end of Far Cry 5. So I'm definitely excited for it, and it's a very quick turnaround as well. Like I just talked about Mortal Kombat 11 being a quick turnaround. Far Cry 5 and then A New Dawn is a very quick turnaround. So I'm also excited to see they call it a standalone game, but they had to have been working on it as they were working on Far Cry 5, because there's no way that they could do this in that quick of a turnaround unless it's a different studio that did it. I haven't really looked into it that much. So definitely tweet at us or comment on our Facebook page for this post or whatever. But yeah, I'm definitely interested to see if they hired another studio or something to work on this while they were working on Far Cry 5, because that's a quick turnaround if it's truly a full standalone game. So, as far as the awards are concerned, the big one, I'm just going to go ahead and talk about Game of the Year, which there was 6 nominees. They were Assassin's Creed Odyssey, Celeste, God of War, Marvel Spider-Man, Monster Hunter World, which made me throw up a little in my mouth that was even nominated. Tyler and I both didn't particularly like that game, but we had never played any of the Monster World or the Monster Hunter games before, so maybe that's it. And then Red Dead Redemption 2. And ultimately God of War 1, which I don't want to say that I was hoping for that because I really, really liked Celeste. That was a game that really kind of blew me away, that I didn't know anything about going in, and I was really just blown away by how cool that game was. And I was excited to see that it was nominated, but ultimately it didn't win. I thought God of War was really, really good. I definitely need to revisit that game because I played basically like 75% of it and then kind of put it away because something else came out. I think it was actually Marvel Spider-Man that came out. And so, yeah, I'm happy to see that win. It was a good crop of nominees this year, except for Monster Hunter World. So I will say that Celeste won for something. Let me find it. I want to say that it was Best Indie Game or something like
right.
that.
That sounds right.
Best Independent Game, Celeste won for that. The nominees were Celeste, again, won. Dead Souls, Into the Breach, Return of the Abra Den, and The Messenger. I've only heard of Celeste, Dead Cells, and Into the Breach. So Into the Breach is a real-time strategy game that looked pretty cool, but I never played it. So Dead Cells was another game that looked pretty cool that I never played. So another good crop of good indie games as well. So I will say that the best performance was won by, let me find it, I'm scrolling through my phone right now. Best performance was, it was, I will just say I know who won, but I can't find his name right now.
Roger Clark?
Yeah, he was the guy that plays Arthur in Red Dead Redemption 2, which is funny because my wife just makes fun of him while I play because it sounds like he's doing his best Josh Brolin impression. And so she thought that was pretty funny that he had won. But I was I don't want to say I was disappointed that he won because I think despite the fact that he sounds like Josh Brolin in that game, I think that he does a really good job as Arthur. But I was a little bit disappointed, and I'm going to mispronounce this guy's name. But Brian DeChart, who is Connor in Detroit Become Human, I mean, that game is all about the performances. And I thought that he did a phenomenal job as Connor. And the fact that he didn't win was a little bit disappointing. But all in all, like I said, I'm not going to go through any of the other awards just because there's so many of them and it would take forever. And we're already kind of running a little bit long. But all in all, I thought that the award show was really cool. And I like that the video games have become a bigger part of pop culture, that they can have these big award shows and they actually do really well, and they kind of make a spectacle of it, like releasing some of these trailers and stuff like that. It's never going to be as big as E3, but I think it's cool that we have this other thing throughout the year that people can get excited for.
Yeah, I asked my wife to get me God of War for Christmas, so I hope that I get it and I can play it because I mean, I've obviously heard how great it is, but I mean, now it's won all these awards, and it makes me want to play it even more. So, good stuff.
I was also excited that, like, there wasn't Fortnite or something like that, like one of these big Battle Royale games. Not that those games were bad. I do enjoy Fortnite, but to be nominated for, like, a game, for an award like Game of the Year or something like that, I thought it would be kind of knee-jerk and pretty silly.
That did win Best Multiplayer Game, though.
For a good reason. I mean, it's a really good game, and it's a sensation right now in gaming. It's creating the Battle Royale genre, so I get why it would win something like that. Like, if it didn't win, that would be pretty silly for that category, but I'm glad that it didn't get nominated for Game of the Year or something like that, because I feel like that should be the single-player games, for sure.
Awesome.
All right, so the next segment is just a main topic. It changes from episode to episode. This week we are going to be reviewing Mowgli, Legend of the Jungle, which was directed by my boy Andy Serkis. It was written by Kaylee Cloves. Of course, it was based on the Kipling book. And this movie is actually kind of has an interesting backstory because I think it was slated for a release in 2016, but was pushed back because, of course, Disney had a live action adaptation or a remake of their animated movie that came out around the same time. So they pushed it back. It was originally filmed for a major movie studio, but then was bought by Netflix months before it was slated for release, because I think it was slated for release in October, and then when Netflix bought it, they pushed it back. It had a limited theatrical release last week, and then it was just released worldwide on Netflix on December 7th. This movie, for the most part, I think everybody knows what this movie's about, but essentially, after his family is attacked and killed by the tiger Shere Khan, Mowgli is raised by a pack of wolves, a panther, and a bear. However, as he gets older, it becomes apparent Mowgli's presence in the jungle puts the whole jungle in danger. So, I think I've made my thoughts pretty clear on the Jungle Book, like the story in general, that I don't particularly care so much about it. I really embarrassed myself when I ripped into the Jungle Book when we were doing I think it was our first ever Rotten Tomatoes film draft that year. And of course I was really wrong, and it's kind of become a bit of legend in our podcast how just laughably wrong I was about that movie and how much I didn't care about that movie. And mostly because I didn't fall in love with the animated movie as most kids did my age, and I just didn't particularly care about the story that much. So I really wasn't super excited for this movie, but I was looking forward to it only because the godfather of mocap was directing it, and I'm going to want to watch basically everything that he does.
Yeah, so for me, if you go back and you listen to our Jungle Book 2016 review, I probably go into not my history necessarily with the story, but just how much I loved that animated movie growing up. And then obviously if you listen to that review, I give it a very positive review, and I still love that 2016 Jon Favreau movie. So this movie was announced, like you said, right around when that movie was announced, and they ended up pushing it back, I think, to distance themselves from that movie. And my thought has been, why even make it anymore? Let Andy Serkis do something else. It's only been 2 years. It's still a little soon for another Jungle Book movie, in my opinion, even if you want to call it Mowgli instead. So going into it, I did not have high hopes.
Did you know that this was actually his directorial debut? Well, I guess if you don't count, he was a second unit director, I think, on the Hobbit movies. But it actually is his second movie to be released because it took so long for it to come out.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so it was actually the movie that he filmed first, but it took so long for it to come out that his other movie, I think it's called Breathe. I haven't watched it yet, but I plan on. It has already come out because it took so long. It kind of got pushed back so many times.
Well, hopefully this does not cost him any future directing gigs if you want to get into it.
Yeah, let's jump right into it. So we start off these reviews by kind of just giving a general overview. Tyler just teased how he felt about the movie, but let's just jump right into broad strokes. So how'd you feel about Mowgli? I almost called it Jungle Book, and I'm going to call it Jungle Book at least once during this review.
So I'm going to be pretty mean. So this movie is a mess. It's boring, it's unnecessary, and even though it's a quote-unquote grittier take on the Rupert Kipling book, it does nothing new for the Jungle Book story and was a giant waste of money. It's no fucking wonder that Warner Brothers dumped this movie on Netflix, and I'm super curious why they even bothered to make it after the success of the 2016 movie. With that being said, even if there had never been another Jungle Book movie ever, this film would still suck and not have an audience.
Oh my God. So you mentioned, I don't know if it was last week or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, you mentioned that one of our listeners mentioned to you that they enjoy when we argue. We are definitely going to argue about this movie because I have to admit that this might be my front runner for a favorite movie of the year. My wife and I both really loved it.
I know you're kidding.
I literally, in my notes, put, it's my front runner for favorite movie of the year, might even crack my top 10 of all time. And then I was like, no, the top 10 thing will give it away. No, yeah, I didn't like this movie. I'm just kidding. I just wanted to troll Tyler a little bit, but apparently this movie is so bad that I can't even make that joke because it's unrealistic that I would enjoy this movie. So, unfortunately, this movie will always be compared to the most recent Jungle Book movie, similar to the way that film will always be compared to the animated film. And this movie is easily the most forgettable of the three. And I kind of feel very similar to the way Tyler just expressed that why even do this? Like, we were sold that this was going to be a darker version, and I use darker in quotes, version of I think it was a short story, wasn't it? I don't even think it was the whole book. I've never read the book, but isn't like the Jungle Book like short stories and Mowgli's only in like one of them?
Correct.
So we were supposed to be, we were sold that this was going to be a darker version of that story. And honestly, other than maybe like the very beginning, I didn't see that at all. I guess they just didn't have any singing, so that made it a darker version. But all in all, I feel very similar to how you felt. It's just, why even bother?
Cool. You ready for story?
Yeah. Well, I guess I know how you felt, but let's go into some of the story beats of Mowgli. Again, almost called it the Jungle Book.
So similar to what we just said in broad strokes, I think we were promised this dark and gritty version of the Mowgli story that we've never seen before, but instead it felt like a movie that was too boring for adults like me, but it would probably be a bit too much for a kid. So I'm really just curious who this movie was even made for. I think it was honestly just made for Andy Serkis. The story itself tries to be original in some ways by slightly changing aspects to the story, but it's still not original enough to warrant a movie. The things that make this movie different makes this movie really bad. There is nothing fun about the film, and there is nothing charming about Mowgli or his story in this movie. So there are threads to the plot that make it seem like it's a story of an emerging hero, but for me, it never felt that way. The plot holes of this movie are easily covered up by the law of the jungle, and it's the law of the jungle that continues to push Mowgli along throughout this movie. The problem is that the idea is dumb, and it's just a reason to allow a character like Shere Khan to wreak havoc and be a dick in every way imaginable with no repercussions. You know, at the plot's convenience, though, the law of the jungle is tossed to the side and doesn't matter in the climax of the movie. So, you know, I really want to talk about this film on its own and not compare it to the other adaptations of the Jungle Book story. But it was just so boring and uninteresting that it's hard to do so, especially whenever there was an amazing movie that came out 2 years ago that tells almost an identical story. So, you know, if anybody were to ask me my opinion of this movie, I would just tell them to watch the 2016 version. And again, as a person that reviews movies on this podcast, I think that it's lazy to make that comparison, but these movies are just so close together that it's almost impossible not to.
For sure, and I just keep going back to what we were just talking about in broad strokes. This story just seems so unnecessary. We've seen this story done so many times that you have to do something different. And like I said earlier, we were sold that this was supposed to be a darker version, and the beginning was. The beginning was very much not Disney. And I appreciated that. And I was like, okay, here we go. Like, this is exactly what I was sold at the beginning of this movie. But unfortunately, the rest of it was just really cookie cutter. I was, however, excited to see that the humans were going to play a bigger role in this movie. Like, at the very beginning, you kind of teased that they're going to play a bigger role. And it doesn't really happen for a while. You don't really see them for a good stretch of the movie. But by the time you do see them, the payoff isn't big enough to make up for the fact that you just don't see him. Like when we finally get to see the people, which would make it different than the other iterations of this movie, it doesn't matter because I've already checked out from this movie. And I will say that Matthew Rhys, his character, who is basically this badass big game hunter, his character is essentially just a plot device to get us to the third act. And he's such a bad hunter. Like in this movie, like, can we talk about how bad of a hunter his character is? So first of all, he can't kill the tiger that these people have clearly hired him to kill. He couldn't hit an elephant, a fucking elephant. There literally can't be a bigger target. He didn't hit the elephant. He shoots Mowgli on accident. The only fucking thing he kills in this movie is like this little puppy albino wolf. That's all he kills in this entire movie. Like, he's the worst fucking hunter I've ever seen in my life. And again, his character is literally just a plot device to get Mowgli to the final showdown with the tiger. So that was very disappointing because that was the one thing in this movie that we were kind of promised. Like, the humans are going to play a bigger role in this movie, and they really don't. Again, they're just plot devices to get us to the showdown. And I've never read Kipling's work before, not just the Jungle Book, but just his work in general. So I don't know if this is more in line with the book, but why does Baloo train the wolves? That plot point doesn't make any sense to me. We want wolves to learn how to be wolves, so let's get a fucking bear to train them how to be a wolf. That makes zero sense whatsoever. I don't get that at all. And why is the first plan to get Mowgli to run faster, to beat these wolves in this race, to swing on branches? Like, I don't understand, like, why that's the first plan. That makes no sense to me. I know I'm nitpicking a little bit, but I mean, I really kind of checked out about 75% of the way through this movie, so most of my story complaints happen in the beginning of the movie. But, like, he's a human being. They call him a fucking man cub. Like, they know he's a person. Why don't they just let him be a person in this race? Like, why is the first idea is, oh, we're going to pretend like you're a monkey? He can't be a wolf. He can't be a monkey. Just let him be a person. Like, let him run. I still don't think it would have mattered, obviously, but it's so weird. Like, they make so many excuses, like you said, just to make, I don't know if it's to make this movie different, but it just kind of made it more silly. And then, of course, once you get to the third act, like I said, I don't have very many notes about the third act because I kind of checked out by that point. But it felt so rushed. And I don't know if this is necessarily true or not, so don't hold me to this. But I read somewhere that, and I didn't do any further research on it, so I'm kind of just taking this person's word for it. But I read somewhere that this was originally conceived as like it was going to be part of a trilogy. So I don't know if the third act is rushed because of that, but it was just like, oh, everything's like, it cleaned up so nicely that I was just like, I kind of rolled my eyes. I was happy because, in one sense, I was happy because it was over and I could be done with it, but at the same time, I was disappointed because you were building up to this showdown and it was very anticlimactic for me.
Yeah, I mean, I agree.
All right, performances. How'd you feel about Mowgli?
I don't know, man. I don't know that it was a performance issue, but I feel like the voice recording seemed off a little bit. I could barely understand Baloo at some points, which I think could potentially be an Andy Serkis problem, but the same went for Cate Blanchett and Christian Bale as well. So I don't know. I mean, I don't think the voice performances were necessarily bad, but there was something wrong with them, and I can't put my finger on it. I would also like the other person to really talk about here is Rohan Chand, who plays Mowgli, and he is, in my opinion, pretty cringeworthy.
Absolutely.
I don't think he's great at Mowgli at all.
Which is weird because I thought he was actually pretty good at bad words. Like, I thought he played off Jason Bateman really well. So I was surprised at how bad he was. Now, we talked about this a little bit when we reviewed the Jungle Book, but I mean, these kids are essentially acting to nothing, so you do kind of have to grade them on a curve. But there was one moment in this movie that I wanted to bring up. So I don't remember if he was talking to the wolf or he was talking to Baloo. He was talking to somebody, and when they told him he wasn't a wolf, he was like shocked, and his shocked face was so cringeworthy. It was really bad, and I kind of laughed for two reasons. One, I mean, they fucking call you a man cub. So, I mean, there's man in the title of what they call you. And second of all, I mean, you would have to be some kind of dummy to not realize that you don't look like a fucking wolf, you idiot. Plus, his acting was really bad. And there's this point where he cries, and he's such an ugly crier that my dick went into my body. That's how cringeworthy it was. Like, it was really, really bad. But yeah, he was really bad. I don't think the mocap performances were necessarily bad. I actually thought that they were kind of good. Like, there was moments in this movie where you can like see the actor's face in the animal. So I thought that was kind of cool because they did do mocap for this movie. But like you said, I do agree that some of the voice performances were a little lackluster for me, especially Cate Blanchett. I felt like she was just doing her character from Lord of the Rings, which was disappointing.
For sure.
All right, so the last thing that I want to talk about, we're not going to really talk about action or comedy or anything with this type of movie, but I think it is important that we talk about the CGI because the CGI was such a big part of the Jungle Book, the 2016 version, and of course it's a big part of this movie as well. So how'd you feel about the CGI in Mowgli?
It was fucking terrible, bro.
Yeah, it was. I don't want to say it was terrible. I wouldn't go that far. It's very uneven because I think there's moments in the movie where it does look kind of good, like it looks passable, but then there's other moments where it's fucking awful.
2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago or whatever it was, we saw the Lion King trailer.
Yeah.
And that movie looks so real, even though it's completely animated. And then I watched this movie and it looks like it was made in 2004.
So there's a moment in this movie where the wolf is laying down. And I think they filmed this movie in South Africa. And so I'm assuming that ground is real. And the wolf is laying down because, again, the hunter can't fucking shoot anything in this fucking movie. And so this wolf is laying down. And it looks so bad. Oh my God, it looks really, really bad. He's laying on this actual ground. And you could just tell what was real and what wasn't real. Oh my God, it was so bad.
Correct.
Yeah, so I've talked about this before, and I think it bears mentioning in this review as well. Like, sometimes, like, the facial animation, like, when they talk, I don't think the technology has necessarily gotten to that point where it can look fluid. In this movie, it was the worst I think I've ever seen. When they talk, the mouths moving looks just god-awful. It looks, like you said, like it was made, like, 20 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, nothing about the animation was good. I think that I hated it more than you did because you said that there were parts where it was okay, and I don't think that there were parts where it was okay. I think that it was garbage. The wolves don't even look like wolves to me. It's just bad.
I don't know, man. There was a couple of moments where I was like, that's pretty cool. Like, that's cool looking. But it was like a split second. And then they would talk again. I was like, oh, yeah, we're watching a Netflix adaptation of this story. But the thing about it is, it was filmed for a major movie studio. So you would thought that it would have basically been done before Netflix came in. Because I know there was somebody on our Facebook page when I posted about the trailer say something about, oh, well, it's a Netflix movie. They're not going to have as much money. But, I mean, it was filmed for a major movie studio. You would have thought that most of that post-production stuff would have been done because they didn't buy it until like 2 months before the movie was going to be released.
Yeah, I mean, it even opens up with the Warner Brothers logo.
Yeah, so I don't know. It was super, super disappointing.
For sure. Let's put a star on this and never talk about this movie again.
For sure. What'd you give this movie?
I'm going to give it a 1.5.
Wow. Yeah, I can't go below 2 just because I love Andy Serkis so much. But yeah, I'm going to give it a 2 because it was very, very disappointing.
Perfect.
All right. So each week we end each episode by doing a nerd favorite, which is basically just the segment where we take turns picking a topic. So obviously the topic changes from episode to episode. It is my week to pick a topic. And I realized as I was going through trying to like think of a topic that we used to do this thing for a couple of weeks where we would go on Ranker and look on some of their lists and kind of give our answers for whatever list that we thought was interesting. And I went on there this morning because I was having a hard time picking out a topic for this episode, and I came across a list that I thought was really fun that we could have an interesting conversation about. So it's basically non-reality TV shows that should be canceled. And so I'm going to run through a couple of the ones on Ranker. So the number one, I'm not going to go through the whole list, obviously. Number one, and this is an older list, so there's going to be a couple of shows that are actually already canceled. But Grey's Anatomy is number one, which I've never watched a single episode of that show, so I can't comment on whether or not I think it should be canceled. Number two was New Girl, which it's already been canceled, so that's fine. American Dad, number three. Nashville, number four. And then the fifth one is The Big Bang Theory, which they are coming up on their final. Are they already? Has the final season already aired?
Bro, I don't know.
Okay. Yeah. But that would be my choice, but it's already being canceled essentially, so I'm not too worried about that. But the number 6 show on this list is actually going to be my pick for the show, the non-reality show that should be canceled, and that is Family Guy. So I've had a weird relationship with this show, and I'm not sure exactly why I said it like that, because that made it sound like I was molested by the show, like this show touched me in a bad place. No, I used to actually really, really like Family Guy. Like when I was a senior in high school and like a freshman in college, like I was obsessed with this show, and as I got older, this show kind of started to wane on me, as shows mostly do. I think for the most part, you're not going to love a show from start to finish as much as you did maybe in the first or second season. Even with like shows that I love, like The Office and stuff like that, like the last couple of seasons are kind of bad for most of my favorite shows. So, I mean, you kind of get that with most shows, but Family Guy, I just like, the fact that it's already on like its 7th or 18th season is just mind-blowing to me, because even at season like 8 or 9, I was like, it's just the same fucking thing over and over again. Like, I feel like with this show, they've run out of good ideas and basically just string together episodes that are filled with just random pop culture references after pop culture references. And maybe that's what the show always was, and I just never noticed it before. But like once they started putting in like segments from other shows like Hee Haw and stuff like that, it just felt like filler to me. And then they just didn't have any more ideas for the show. And there are moments in this show that, especially in the early seasons, that are really funny. It just got to the point where they just felt like they weren't trying anymore. And people still love this show, and I just don't understand why.
Yeah, I agree. I was never a huge Family Guy fan for whatever reason. I don't know why. But my answer... So the first 2 shows that came to mind are already in their last season. So similar to you, Big Bang Theory was my first pick, and then Gotham was another pick of mine. That's a good one too. It's in its last season, so it doesn't really count as an answer. So instead, I will go ahead and say American Horror Story. So I watched the first 4.5 seasons of the show, I think, and it just progressively got worse and worse, and it progressively got to the point where it was unwatchable. And the show has like a cult following for whatever reason, and it tries to reinvent itself every year. And I don't know, my opinion is it fails to do so. My wife loves this show, and I catch bits and pieces of it as she watches it once the newest season's available on Netflix, and it's just not a good show. I appreciate the idea around it. Like, I think an anthology horror show series like this could be a really cool idea, but I guess I'm maybe just not the biggest Ryan Murphy fan, because it's definitely gone off the rails in the last 5 or 6 seasons.
So Ryan Murphy is a guy that he starts off strong for me. Like, I really liked Nip Tuck, And then as that show went along, like it got more and more ridiculous, and it went completely off the rails. And I really liked Glee for a few episodes. Like it didn't even last a full season for me, and I was just like, I'm already tired of the show. And then American Horror Story, like I just couldn't get past like the first like 2 or 3 episodes, and now I just don't even. Like, if he's coming out with a new show, I don't even pay attention to it because I just know that I'm not going to like it.
For sure. I mean, even the American Crime Show, or whatever it's called, like, the first season, I don't know if you watched it with OJ.
Yeah, I love that show.
Yeah, it was really good. I didn't watch the second season, though, and I haven't heard anything about it, so I can't imagine that it was near as good as the first season.
I want to say it got a couple of Golden Globes. I know that you didn't really go through too many of the nominees or the categories, but I want to say it got a couple of Golden Globe nominees.
Yeah, I'll have to look into that then, because I just imagined that, oh wow, another of his shows that's already gotten bad. So maybe if it got some Golden Globe nominations, I'll have to check it out, but that's kind of
I forgot he even did that show.
Yeah. He's got a lot of shows that he does.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so that is it for episode 219 of the Nerd You're Looking For podcast. Of course, we hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, subscribe, rate, review us on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, basically any good podcatcher you use. We're on it, and that really helps us out. There are a ton of TV, film, comic book podcasts out there, so the more rating and reviews we get on each podcatcher, the more it kind of separates us from the pack. So we definitely appreciate that. And like I said in the intro, you can check out our website, thenerdspodcast.com. It has basically all of our content on there. You can find our YouTube channel. You can find our nerd reviews tab that I was talking about earlier. Just basically everything, including our Letterboxd accounts, all that good stuff. Of course, follow us on Twitter and Instagram. They're both at The Nerds Podcast. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Google+. You can also email us at thenerdsyou'relooking4@gmail.com. And finally, vote for us for Podcast of the Month at podcastland.com. For Patrick Kuhn,
Tyler Hunt,
we are The Nerds You're Looking For. Take it easy, nerds.
Later, guys.